The Australian Open tennis has started. There were fans at matches, very tight social distancing. There are also questions about why this tournament is happening. We can't afford to roll the dice, said the leader of the opposition in Victoria. And there remain questions about how tennis has navigated the pandemic as a whole. The men's world number one, Novak Djokovic, has been a central character in all of that. In April, he said during a live chat on Facebook, "Personally, I'm opposed to vaccination and I wouldn't want to be forced by someone to take a vaccine." Then in June, despite warnings, Djokovic hosted the Adria Tour event in Serbia and Croatia. This also featured fans and matches, but instead of social distancing, there was basketball and clubbing. And sure enough, Djokovic, his wife and several of the pairs got COVID-19. Then, having had a few weeks to reflect, Djokovic announced, "If I had the chance to do the Adria Tour again, I would do it again. I don't think I've done anything bad, to be honest." Djokovic also sought to clarify his position on vaccines, saying he wasn't anti-vaccination, but that, "To be honest, just like the rest of the world, I'm a bit confused." He went on, "Despite having access to information and resources, I'm left in doubt about what could be the best thing to do." Well, Djokovic may be a bit confused on vaccines. Scientists, though, don't seem to be.
Vaccines will be critical in the battle against COVID-19.
Well, as the season went on, Wimbledon was cancelled, but the US Open went ahead, albeit with some key players missing. The French Open also went ahead. And into the autumn, the controversies continued. In October, US player Sam Querrey took a private jet from Russia to London after he, his wife and his child tested positive. Since then, he's highlighted that he was worried they'd have to quarantine in hospital and that the plane to London cost him $40,000. And he's added, "I had my wife there and I had my baby there, and as a human decision, I had to do what I feel is right." He had, though, broken coronavirus rules in the UK and Russia. And then came the build-up to the Australian Open. Australia's made a success of restraining COVID-19 using a strict 14-day quarantine rule for new arrivals, with strict confinement to hotel rooms if there's any contact with a COVID case. Improbably, that came as a surprise to some. The Kazakh player Yulia Putintseva tweeted, "What I don't understand is why no one ever told us. If one person on board is positive, the whole plane needs to be isolated. I would think twice before coming here." The state government was perplexed.
The notion that there's been any change, the notion that people weren't briefed, I think that argument really has no integrity whatsoever.
Some players were able to train up to 5 hours a day, but those that came in on flights with positive cases on board could not leave their room at all. Some started posting videos as they trained in their rooms. Men's number 13, Bautista Agut, told us it's like being in a jail, but with Wi-Fi, which begs the question if he's ever been in one. Next, there's the Australian player Bernard Tomic's girlfriend, OnlyFans model Vanessa Sierra. In a YouTube video, she said, "I don't wash my own hair. I've never washed my own hair. It's just not something I do. I cannot wait to get out of quarantine just to get my hair done." Another player complained about mice in a hotel room, only to be accused by the police of feeding them. And then Novak Djokovic entered the fray again. He sent a long list of ideas to the authorities. He wanted a reduction of the isolation period, the relocation of players to private houses with access to a tennis court, and the delivery of decent food. That didn't go down well.
The answer is no, because the virus doesn't treat you specially, so neither do we.
Well, that was the official response. The Australian player Nick Kyrgios went for a different choice of words, tweeting, "Djokovic is a tool." Now, while the reaction to Djokovic's ideas weren't a great surprise to many, evidently they were to the man himself. He put out a statement saying he'd had good intentions, but they'd been misconstrued as selfish, difficult and ungrateful. Some suggested there hadn't been any misconstruing. And while all of this played out, the tournament loomed with risk attached. Do you remember this from last week? A worker at the tournament tested positive and more than 500 players and staff had to go into isolation. All, fortunately, have tested negative. But it highlighted the chance Australia is taking with its success during this pandemic. And to understand why it's taking that risk, this statistic is helpful. In 2020, the Australian Open injected 387 million Australian dollars, 300 million US dollars, into the economy. The state premier argues if the Australian Open does not happen in Melbourne, it'll happen somewhere else. It will happen in Japan, it will happen in China, it will happen in Singapore. The real risk then is it doesn't come back. Now, whether that's really a possibility, it's hard to say. Melbourne evidently didn't want to find out. But it's not just about the money, we're told. It's about the pandemic too.
We'll be able to send a signal to the rest of the world that in the middle of this pandemic, we can pull off an event with crowds, be safe, and have the world's best tennis players here for 2 weeks and going back to the rest of the world and saying we should do it like Australia does it.
And so, while some parts of the world continue to live with lockdowns, some fans are getting to go to the tennis.
Melbourne's a huge sporting capital of the world and people love the sport here and it makes them happy.
It's so great to have sport back in Melbourne and tennis. It's just fantastic.
And the big prize in this Australian Open may be less about who wins the singles titles and much more about whether Melbourne can get to the end of the tournament without the virus intervening.